Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere cold bone deep, wind blown, puffin' screeching cold. You're trudging along the wind-swept edge of a rocky island in the North Atlantic, wrapped in layers of scratchy wool, boots crusted in salt, eyes squinting against the horizontal sleet. There's no sun, of course. Not in February. And somewhere behind you, tucked low into the mossy hills like a sheep trying not to be noticed, is your little turf-roofed house. Smoke curls from its stone chimney. You'd be excited to get home if only you knew what was or wasn't for dinner. Welcome to medieval Iceland. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've arrived in a land where life is stark and stubborn. The soil is stingy, the wind opinionated, and the sea, well, let's just say the sea has its moods. And if you're one of the 50,000 or so people trying to make a life here around the year 1150, your relationship with food is complicated. Most days, you rely on the sea fishing cod, haddock, herring, or whatever else you can coax from the waves. But that's only when the sea cooperates. Which, in case you were wondering, is not often. One bad storm, and your fishing gear is gone. 1 week of rough water, and the fish are elsewhere. One winter like the one you're in now, and you might go an entire season with little more than dried scraps from last summer's haul. That means food is less a menu and more a mood, unpredictable, grumpy, and very beach. Let's start at the surface, the landscape itself. Iceland is volcanic, craggy, and not exactly what you'd call fertile. Imagine trying to plant carrots in a lava field, and you're on the right track. Most of the island's arable land is tucked into tiny coastal valleys or clings desperately to riverbanks. Even there, soil is shallow and acidic, and it's a miracle anything grows that doesn't also hiss at you. But people are resourceful. They learn to farm sheep on steep slopes. They coax barley from reluctant fields. And they build houses partly underground both to stay warm, and to avoid being blown into the Atlantic like that one cousin no one talks about. Now, inside that turf house your house things are snug, if dim. The walls are made of stone and stacked earth, layered with birch bark and grass for insulation. There's a central hearth where a low fire flickers, and above it, dried fish dangles like stiff laundry. The air smells like wool, smoke, and something faintly fermented. Spoiler, almost everything smells faintly fermented. Your family sleeps on low wooden platforms tucked into alcoves. There are no separate rooms. Privacy is theoretical. Flatulence is communal. Your mother is stirring something in it. Soot-blackened pot, maybe barley mush, maybe musk stew, maybe that one leftover fish spine you've all been politely ignoring for 3 days. You sneak a peek. It's mos. Again. Historians still argue whether medieval Icelanders actually enjoyed their cuisine or simply tolerated it with the grim patience of people who've never heard of pizza. Written records suggest both. The sagas mention lavish feasts, yes, but also long winters of sour things and bitter hardship, which sounds suspiciously like the menu at your uncle's wedding. Even when fish was plentiful, it wasn't always appealing. Sure, you could dry it, smoke it, or bury it in sand for a few weeks and pretend it was a delicacy. But mostly, it was just something to chew on, while trying not to think about stew again. You wrap your cloak tighter. The wind howls against the house, a ghostly whistle slipping through cracks. Somewhere outside, a sheep bleats in protest, possibly at the weather, possibly at its dinner options. You understand. Your day tomorrow includes checking the fish drying racks probably empty, helping churn scurry yogurt that fights back, and if you're lucky scouting for seaweed along the shore. It's not glamorous, but it's food. Sorta. And yet, there's something oddly comforting in this rhythm. The slowness. The closeness. The way the firelight paints golden streaks across the packed earth walls. The way even the smallest bite of smoked meat feels like triumph. You don't just eat to live, you scheme, share, scrape, and celebrate every calorie like it's a blessing from the gods. So tonight, as your father tells the same story has told every winter since the sheep got stuck in the pantry, and your little brother falls asleep with puffin feathers in his hair, you close your eyes and imagine spring. Fish returning. Barley ripening. Maybe even cheese. Just don't get your hopes up about the cheese. The morning wind doesn't so much blow as it shoves. It finds every loose seam in your cloak, every gap between your mittens and your sleeves, and enthusiastically fills your bones with cold. You brace yourself against it as you step outside, boots crunching into frost-crusted turf, the gray sky low enough to touch. The sea is just a smear of movement in the distance, more sound than sight. And there's one thing you notice immediately, the nets are still empty. Again. In medieval Iceland, the sea giveth, and the sea most definitely taketh away, especially during winter. Fishing was a pillar of life here, but it wasn't dependable. Entire communities lived in rhythm with the coast, and yet, every few months, it betrayed them. The weather turns, the fish migrate, or the ice pushes your little boat into retirement. That meant you, like many of your neighbors, would face entire weeks with nothing freshly caught, nothing freshly anything. This isn't just inconvenient, it's a crisis. Fish weren't just dinner, they were currency. You could trade dried fish for cloth, for tools, even for legal settlements, yes. You could literally pay fines in cod. So when your nets come up with more seaweed than seafood, your pantry isn't the only thing that feels emptier. Your entire social standing deflates a little too. You head toward the beach, hoping the tide has left something useful. Shellfish. Driftwood. A confused seal willing to be reasoned with. Instead, you find your uncle staring at the waves with that same expression he used when your cousin married a Norwegian. Disappointment edged with existential dread. Nothing, he mutters. And you know he doesn't mean fish. He means the boats are frozen to the dock again. The bait's all gone, and the gulls are laughing at you from above. There were good seasons, of course, the glorious catches where barrels of herring piled up like treasure. But the bad years came often and lingered. Archaeologists have found layers of fishbone and charcoal ash compacted between sod layers of ancient turf houses, like a geological record of feast and famine. Historians still argue whether communities intentionally underfished to preserve stock or were just at the mercy of the sea's chaotic moods. Either way, Icelanders became masters of the culinary pivot. What happens when the fish disappear? You improvise. You ration. You get creative in ways that would terrify a modern food blogger. Leftover bones from last summer. Oil them until they release every last ghost of flavor. Old dried fish scraps. Pound them into flakes, rehydrate with sour whey, and pretend it's stew. Fish oil. Pour it over moss. Yes, moss. Well, get to that. Some communities sent expeditions to neighboring fjords, days of walking through knee-deep snow just to ask if someone else had fish. Others turned to shore fishing, casting lines into tidal pools or spearing flatfish hiding in the sand. It was a game of diminishing returns, but hunger is a great motivator. Even children were expected to help. You remember standing knee-deep in icy water, holding a wicker basket, watching the surface for movement. Not that anything moved, of course. Except your toe shivering in protest. You glance at the sky. Snow's coming. Again. And your cousin is already trudging back toward the village, empty-handed but pretending to whistle. No one believes him. Back in the house, your mother is adjusting rations. She's cut tomorrow's barley portion by half. The scar tub is running low. You overhear her muttering about the root cellar, whether it's worth checking if the fermented turnips are still edible or if they've achieved sentience by now. And here's the thing. This is normal. Not fun, not exciting, but normal. Icelandic communities expected hardship and prepared for it like squirrels hoarding acorns with a fin logistics. Every summer, people dried, smoked, salted, and buried anything remotely edible. Winters were always uncertain. They didn't ask if the sea would abandon them, they asked when. You sit by the fire, gnawing on a bit of last year's dried fish that tastes exactly how a wooden oar smells. It flakes in your mouth like parchment and refuses to soften, no matter how much sour whey you chase it with. You tell yourself it's fine. This is food. This is survival. And outside, the sea keeps roaring. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just indifferently. You can hear it in the distance, a sound like a tired animal shifting in its sleep. There's a sort of peace in that indifference. The sea doesn't hate you. It doesn't even know you exist. Which is somehow more comforting than it should be. Tomorrow, you'll check the traps again. Maybe the ice will shift. Maybe a seal will wander too close. Or maybe just maybe the fish will remember you're still waiting. You wake before the sun, though sun is perhaps too generous a term for what the sky provides this time of year. It's more of a slightly lighter shade of gray, like an apology from the heavens that doesn't quite land. You pull on your cloak, brittle with salt from yesterday's failed fishing attempts, and head out to join your cousins. Today's mission, foraging. Not for mushrooms or berries, those are distant summer luxuries, but for moss, lichen, and whatever else the ground might reluctantly offer. It's what your family calls stone soup day. Not because you're actually eating rocks, though honestly, it's sometimes close about because that's the joke. When the fish vanish, the livestock are starving, and even your dried sheep intestines are looking thin. You turn to what you can find on the land. And in Iceland's medieval winter, the land doesn't offer much. Still, you make do. You follow the path up a rocky slope, past the half-collapsed sheet pen and the crusted remains of last week's snow. The wind is sharp and smells faintly of sulfur, one of the many perks of living atop an island made entirely of volcanoes and good intentions. You kneel beside a moss-covered stone and begin to gather tufts of soft, green lichen. It clings to the rock like shy wallpaper. You scrape gently with a bone spoon. Every fragment counts. Your cousin jokes that you're preparing a feast fit for the gods. You both laugh, though your stomach isn't in on the joke. Medieval Icelanders were skilled foragers, but their options were deeply limited. The environment was subarctic, and the growing season was brief and moody. That didn't stop them. They learned to gather fjelagursa, kind of Iceland moss that looks suspiciously like something scraped from the bottom of a very old boot. When boiled, it thickens into a grayish gruel that tastes like slightly sad tea. Add some whey, maybe a chunk of seal fat, and you've got yourself a proper dinner. Historians still debate whether lichen was a staple or an emergency measure. Some argue it was part of a broader winter diet, others suggest it only appeared in dire times. Either way, it was common enough to earn a nickname in sagas and survive centuries of culinary complaints. And if you're wondering how many calories it provides, the answer is, not enough. But again, it's warm. It's food. It's better than nothing. You also find some melrt, a wiry, bitter root that grows along riverbanks. It's not exactly sweet, but it can be boiled down with sour milk to make something vaguely pudding adjacent. If you squint hard and lie to yourself, there's a kind of pride to it all, weirdly. A sense that even when the sea has betrayed you, and the sheep are hibernating under 5 feet of snow, you can still wrest a meal from the earth. It may be a mossy, gray, slightly crunchy meal, but it's yours. By noon, you've filled your sack with enough moss and roots to provide a few meals. Your fingers are raw, your cheeks wind-burned, and your boots have collected a full pint of slush. But you head home humming, because you've done something useful. In a world where survival depends on teamwork, even small victories count. Back in the longhouse, your mother is boiling something ominous. You recognize the smell immediately, lichen soup, thickened with barley scrapings and that one lump of sheep fat someone found under a bench. You're not sure when it was originally cooked, possibly last season. It's been revived, Lazarus style, for one more appearance. The hearth is crackling. Your younger brother is poking moss with a stick, trying to convince it to be bread. Your father, always the optimist, is carving spoons for what? No one's sure. Probably just to feel productive. Then there's the stone. In the corner of the hearth sits a large, round river rock, blackened from countless years of fire. It's not there for show. Sometimes, when food was scarce, Icelanders would literally boil stones to retain heat in water or make stews feel fuller. The warm stone radiated heat into the pot, giving the illusion of something heartier than what was actually there. It didn't add flavor, of course. Just hope. You help ladle the soup into wooden bowls. It's more broth than anything, but there's a rhythm to the meal, steam rising in. Soft curls, quiet chewing, the occasional could be worse muttered between sips. And truly it could be. You've had soup made entirely from dried seaweed and leftover curds. You've seen someone eat bar. Outside, the wind picks up. Inside, the soup warms your belly just enough to make you sleepy. Your mother pats your hand. Your brother has spilled half his bowl into his lap and doesn't care. You all sit in the half-light of the fire, bellies half full, minds half drifting. And you know what? That's enough. A sheep sneezes. That's the first sound you hear as you step outside in the early light. Well, not light exactly, more like a slightly brighter gray. It's early spring now, or what passes for spring in medieval Iceland. The wind is still impolite. Snow lurks in the shadows of stones. But there's a sliver of mud showing beneath the slush, and the sheep have stopped glaring at you like furry harbingers of doom. Today, you're checking the animals. Specifically, the cows if they've made it through the winter. That's a genuine if, by the way. Keeping livestock alive in medieval Iceland was a full-time gamble. Cattle, in particular, were delicate creatures in a land that was anything but. They needed constant shelter, vast stores of hay, and a disturbing tolerance for close quarters. The longhouses had no dedicated barns, so cows and sheep often lived indoors with the family. Picture a very cramped airbnb that smells like wet wool and occasional panic. You slide open the turf door to the byre, and brace yourself. The cows are alive but barely. Their ribs show, their eyes are slow, and one is definitely chewing on something that is not hay. Could be moss. Could be laundry. You don't ask. One cow lifts her head and lets out a long, mournful moo that somehow communicates both hunger and existential regret. You pat her gently. Same. During the summer, you had 6 cows. Now, 3.5, depending on how optimistic you feel about the one in the corner. The family has rationed hay as tightly as possible, but between poor harvests and damp storage, most of it turned moldy by midwinter. And when hay runs out, cows eat seaweed, moss, or in the worst cases each other's bedding. It's not ideal. Meat is precious. You don't just butcher animals unless you absolutely have to. Milk, cheese, and manure are worth far more over time than a single feast. So families fight to keep their animals alive, not just for affection, but for survival math. A cow that gives milk in June is a bigger win than one that becomes soup in March. Still, when desperation knocks, you do what you must. Historians still argue whether Icelanders practiced routine livestock slaughter each winter or simply culled the weakest to spare resources. Archaeological records show varied strategies. Some regions favored slaughter and preservation, others doubled down on animal survival. The result? You sometimes got meat. But mostly, you got bone soup, dairy, and a house that smelled like cow farts 24/7. Today though, you're lucky. The cows are upright, if cranky. Your mother milks the least grumpy one while humming something ancient and tuneless. The milk is thin but real, and your younger brother immediately tries to drink straight from the bucket. You stop him just in time. Back in the longhouse, Breakfast consists of the last chunk of hangicket smoked lamb from last summer's slice so thin it might qualify as a rumor. It's served with whey-soaked barley and a pat of sour skur on a wooden plate. Everyone eats slowly, savoring the idea of flavor more than the flavor itself. Your uncle grumbles about how in the old days the cows were fatter, the hay sweeter, the winters kinder. No one reminds him that he once tried to dry fish inside the latrine, and nearly poisoned the entire village. Family stories are curated with love. You remember last autumn's attempt to build a better hayloft. The community gathered with ropes, stone tools, and precisely one ladder that squeaked like it was haunted. You stacked the hay in tight bundles, sealed the roof with turf, and prayed for drayness. It mostly worked until the November rain came sideways, and turned half of it into fungal porridge. You fed it to the sheep anyway. They were not amused. Despite it all, the family keeps going. Every day the cows survive is a little miracle. Every cup of milk is a toast to perseverance. You learn to make dough, skur that's more curd than cream, butter that sometimes tastes like smoke, cheese hard enough to crack teeth but still, it's yours. You help your aunt churn milk in a sealed bladder, kneeling on the floor and rolling it back and forth like a reluctant pillow fight. After an hour, you open it to find a slit clump of what could generously be called butter. You smear some on a scrap of barley flatbread. It's sour, a little smoky, and faintly tastes of pouch. But warm bread, even vaguely edible, feels like royalty. Later that night, the family gathers around the hearth, not for a feast, but for togetherness. Your father tells a story about the time a cow escaped midwinter and wandered into a snowdrift, only to be found 2 days later wearing someone's lost mitten. Everyone laughs, even the cow. She snorts. And you tucked under your wool blanket, the scent of smoke and dairy in your hair, you feel a small, strange kind of peace. The cows are alive. The milk didn't curdle. And for once, nobody mentioned fish. Tomorrow might bring storms. Or thaw. Or more moss. But tonight, your stomach is warm, your home is full, and your cow didn't eat your sock. Progress. The wind has died down a little today, which should be good news. Except it means the smell of seal blubber now has nowhere to go. You catch it the moment you step out, thick, oily, unmistakable, and realize that someone nearby is rendering fat. Again. Seal blubber might not be the dream meat of every medieval Icelander, but when the fish disappear and your cow starts eyeing you suspiciously, you make peace with your options. And one of those options waddles helpfully onto shore every now and then with a thick layer of survival wrapped in oily insulation. You follow the smell to your neighbor's lean-to. Inside, a large seal carcass is strung up like a macabre chandelier. The blubber is being carefully scraped into a pot over a peat fire. The result will be a dense, grazy substance that can be used in cooking, lighting, or when things get really desperate, eaten by itself, usually with a side of grimacing. Seal hunting wasn't exactly a sport in medieval Iceland. It was a frantic, cold, high-risk effort to stay alive. Seals came ashore in small groups, especially in the spring, and families would camp out on icy beaches just to catch one or two. The meat was lean, the organs nutritious, and the blubber, well, the blubber was everything. Historians still debate just how central seal products were to the Icelandic diet. Some argue they were regional staples in the north and east, others claim they were emergency food, used only when livestock failed. Either way, the blubber wasn't wasted. Not a drop. It got rendered, stored in seal stomachs or clay pots, and used over the next several weeks for both calories and barter. You accept a small chunk from your neighbor, a token of generosity that you know better than to refuse. It's chewy, waxy, vaguely fishy. You smile politely. It squeaks between your teeth. At home, your mother is working on something only slightly more appealing, puffin jerky. Yes, puffins, the adorable, wide-eyed sea birds that look like cartoon monks. In summer, they swarm Iceland's cliffs in colorful chaos. In winter, they are, regrettably, tasty. Puffin meat is dark, oily, and gamey. The birds are trapped in nets or hunted with long-handled hooks. Once caught, they're plucked and cleaned, then hung in rows in the smokehouse until they resemble small, tragic umbrellas. You help her take down a string of them. The smell is strong, enough to summon ancient ghosts. One puffin gets chopped and added to the stew, what your mother calls featherless generosity. It simmers with turnip peel, half a barley cake, and just enough seal fat to make the texture slippery. That's the word she uses. Slippery. You try not to think about it too hard. As it turns out, you won't be eating much of it tonight. Your uncle has shown up unexpectedly, dragging behind him a sled with 2 sacks and a look of triumph. He's just returned from a coastal village 3 days' walk away, where the wind apparently liked people better and the fish were biting. He has dried cod. The sacks are half full of yellowing, brittle slabs of preserved fish, hard as shingles. You've eaten this before. You have to eat this before. But tonight, it feels like a celebration. Someone even breaks out the leftover sour milk to soften the fish into something chewable. You gnaw at a strip until your jaw clicks, then dip it in a bowl of seal oil to cut the salt. The texture is somewhere between driftwood and regret, but you eat slowly, letting the warmth of the meal settle low in your belly. This is what victory tastes like, slightly moldy cod, and memories of better months. Dinner ends with a treat. Your mother has taken a puffin leg, smoked and crisped it over the hearth, and dusted it with crushed seaweed. It crunches like burnt parchment, but there's a hint of salt, a whisper of protein, and it's shared like gold. That night, your father leans back from the fire and recites a bit of Icelandic epic poetry about a sailor who was saved from drowning by a talking seal who demanded only his last piece of jerky in return. You don't know if it's real. You don't care. It's warm. It's funny. You all laugh. The world outside is still bleak. The sea is still a maybe. But in here, puffins and seals and stubborn human will have made something like a meal. You close your eyes, belly full enough, mind half drifting to dreams of flying puffins that chase you with seal fat torkas. It's probably fine. You're standing in the corner of the longhouse, squinting at a lump that might be bread. Or possibly a mistake. It's hard to say. The loaf is dense, scorched on one edge, and sprinkled with what you pray is ash and not something else. You pick it up, sniff it, and shrug. Breakfast. Grain in medieval Iceland is not something to take for granted. It's imported, it's expensive, and half the time it shows up half spoiled or riddled with weevils. And yet, somehow, people find ways to turn it into food. Or food-adjacent objects that resemble biscuits if you squint hard and believe in miracles. The truth is, Iceland's climate is no friend to cereal crops. Barley was the only grain hardy enough to consider planting, and even then, it barely tolerated the short summers and frequent volcanic tantrums. So most grain had to come from elsewhere, usually via trade routes that were just as moody as the weather. When shipments made it through, they were split up carefully, some for porridge, some for bread, and some to stretch out soups that were already 70 vague things found near rocks. You've helped with baking before. It's less rustic farmhouse baking show and more controlled chaos with ash. There are no ovens. Instead, you use a flat stone or metal plate placed over peat coals. If you're fancy, you have a covered pot to trap heat. But mostly, it's guesswork and instinct. The batter is coarse, gritty, and barely clings together. The fire's uneven. And dung smoke is an ingredient whether you like it or not. Historians still argue whether Icelanders preferred barley cakes to flatbreads, or simply rotated based on what didn't catch fire that day. What's clear is that baking was a collaborative event. Someone mixed the batter, someone stoked the fire, and someone always hovered nearby holding a stick, ready to poke suspicious bubbles. Today, you're trying a new trick, adding ground angelica root to the dough. It's bitter, but it hides the taste of old flour and possibly discourages worms. You saw your cousin use it last week, and no one vomited, so it's practically certified. Your aunt walks in holding a small pouch of rye flour. Real rye. Probably smuggled in from Norway. She cradles it like a newborn and insists it's only for special occasions, which means it'll be saved for a wedding, a funeral, or possibly the day someone invents chocolate. You eat the bread slowly, savoring the chew. It's hard, dry, and has a vaguely metallic aftertaste. But it's warm, and filling, and not moss, which, at this point, feels like a culinary vacation. Mid-8, you're assigned to the grain storage shed, a generous term for a small stone lean-to with one door, no lock, and a constant draft. Inside are several sealed barrels, each marked with different trade glyphs. One has barley. One has oats. One, somehow, smells like despair. You open each carefully, checking for mold, worms, or suspicious squishiness. It's not glamorous, but grain meant everything. It was traded like silver, stored like treasure, and protected from moisture like a grudge. A barrel of barley could mean bread for a month or a bribe for your neighbor to stop singing at night. You haul a small sack back home and help grind it. The family owns a querna hand-turned stone mill that grinds grain between two circular slabs. You sit, legs on either side, turning the top stone in slow circles as powder sifts out below. It's rhythmical, almost meditative, until your arms go numb. The flour is coarse, full of little pebbles and whole fragments. You'll sift it, but some always makes it through, which is probably why everyone's teeth are chipped. This evening's meal is a celebration of sorts. Your uncle found a lump of old butter wrapped in sheep hide in the back of the root cellar. It smells assertive, but it softens the bread. And someone adds a pinch of smoked salt to the barley porridge, which is basically wizardry. As the night creeps in, and the fire glows low, you nibble a second piece of bread, even harder than the first. You knock it against the table. It sounds like knocking on a tim. You eat it anyway. Because this is bread. This is grain, gathered from distant shores, hauled across stormy seas, ground by hand, baked over dung smoke, and shared in lather. This is survival. Your father raises a piece in mock toast. To bread so dense, it could stop a Viking axe. You all cheer quietly. Tonight, the longhouse smells suspicious. Not bad, exactly just a lie. You wrinkle your nose as a sour, almost metallic scent creeps from the storage pit beneath the floorboards. It's the unmistakable signal that fermentation season never really ends. And in medieval Iceland, that's not just a culinary technique, it's a way of life. Fermentation wasn't optional here. It was essential. With no refrigeration, limited salt, and a climate that turned vegetables into frozen rocks by mid-October, Icelanders turned to time, bacteria, and creative stink to preserve what they had. The result? A national tradition of food that smells like it might punch you. You're helping your mother prepare some dope sour milk. Not sour as in this went off last week, but sour as in this was left on purpose in a wooden tub for a month, stirred with a sheep shin, and now has a consistency somewhere between yogurt and building material. It's tangy. It's thick. And when mixed with barley mash, it's breakfast. You dip a spoon in. It coats the wood like paint. You eat it anyway. In the corner, a sealed leather bag bulges ominously. Inside is Carl fermented shark. The Greenland shark, when fresh, is poisonous. But someone long ago, possibly hungry, possibly unhinged, discovered that if you bury it for 6 to 12 weeks, then dry it in open air, it becomes edible. Not pleasant, but edible. Historians still argue whether Carl was a delicacy or a desperate improvisation that became tradition through sheer stubbornness. Either way, it became a staple for some coastal communities. You're not near the sea right now, but your uncle brought a chunk home from a trading trip. Lucky you. You cut a piece. It's spawny. Pale. Smells like a cross between ammonia and regret. You hold your breath and chew. It doesn't help. Still, you wash it down with Cercerhertzbungars or ram's testicles. Fermented, of course. Sliced thin and served cold. You try not to think too hard about that one. There's a strange comfort to it all. This is food that has transformed not just preserve. It's gone through alchemy. From perishables to pickled resilience. From rot to ritual. Even the sour whey used to be poured into large barrels and used to preserve meat, fish, or sausages. The acidity kept bacteria at bay, the tang became familiar, and the smell, well, you stopped noticing after a while. Today, you're also bottling mead. Sort of. Honey is rare, but your aunt's bees survived the winter, and someone accidentally left some old scar and wildflowers near the cooking pit last week. The bubbling result now smells vaguely alcoholic, and might even be drinkable by midsummer. You help stir the mixture, careful not to disturb the crust forming on top. It's a mix of sour and sweet, like someone whispering insults through a sugar cube. You bottle it in a sheep's stomach, tie the end, and place it in the cool shadow of the back wall. Later, someone brings out bring her a slurry of sour milk, blood, and bits of bread. It's dinner. It's tradition. You eat it. Fermentation is more than technique here, it's the philosophy of survival. Nothing is wasted. Everything is extended. Time itself becomes a seasoning. And in the low warmth of the hearth, you begin to appreciate it. These flavor-sod, sharp, sometimes alarming are the fingerprints of generations. The way your ancestors said, we stayed. We endured. We made this work. You sip a little way. It puckers your mouth and warms your belly. It reminds you of summer sun. On hay fields of sheep bleating happily, and later, less happily, of barrels sealed with wax and hope. The longhouse creaks. Outside, a soft snow has begun to fall. Inside, you wrap a wool blanket tighter and nibble a crust of fermented bread dipped in sour cream and seaweed ash. You've stopped asking questions. Because this, in all its strangeness, is home. The wind slips under the turf roof like it owns the place. You're crouched in the pantry alcove, a half-underground nook carved out beside the longhouse, poking around shelves that haven't been dusted since last harvest. And here's the thing, they smell like everything and nothing. Ash. Mold. Finger. Smoked fat. Wool. Desperation. Memory. Welcome to the medieval Icelandic larder. Forget glossy labels or shelves lined in neat rows. Here, pantry means a smoky, shadowy space where food is stacked in clay jars, wooden boxes, and animal bladders. If it fits, it sits. If it doesn't smell actively threatening, it gets safe. And if it does well, someone might still eat it if the sheep don't make it to spring. Today you're helping your mother reorganize the shelves. She's muttering about inventory. It's less of a system and more of an emotional journey. You pull out a sealed sheepskin pouch, untie the nut, and peer inside. Pickled ram's testicle, soft, grayish, floating in sour whey. Delightful. There's also a string of boiled and singed sheep heads, each one split neatly in half and hung from a ceiling beam by its jaw. They're a delicacy. At least, that's what people say when trying not to cry. Historians still debate the prevalence of in everyday diets versus feasting contexts. Some records suggest it was a treat, others imply it was common. Either way, it's here now, gently swinging, like a meat chandelier. You find a barrel of blood sausage necks. It's sealed with a thick lid and a rock. You pry it open to find coiled lengths of dark sausage in sour whey. It smells complicated. You replace the lid. Along the back wall sits a prized possession, smoked lamb. Ein jacket. It's been hung for months, slowly absorbing the flavors of the hearth peat, moss, dung smoke, and thyme. The outer surface is almost black. Your mother slices a thin piece and hands it to you. You chew slowly, savoring the salt and smoke. It's chewy. Intense. Real food. Your little sister tugs your sleeve and proudly reveals a jar she's discovered. Inside is what might once have been cheese. Or soap. No one knows. You close it quickly and assign it to not yet. There's a sack of dried seaweed, tangled like old hair and just as appetizing. You'll boil it with sour, wait tomorrow for lunch. It's nutritious. It's fibrous. It's not actively trying to kill you. One shelf holds dried herbs, angelica, crowberry leaves, birch bark. They're used to flavor milk, tea, or for convincing children that this gray soup is totally different from yesterday's gray soup. You sniff the birch, it smells faintly like optimism. The meat shelf is where things get philosophical. A smoked seal fin. A jar of pickled puffin eggs. Something wrapped in wool that no one has touched since autumn. Your father claims it's just resting. You hope he's right. There's even a small stash of dried fish skin, used for broth or, in emergencies, as a sort of chewy snack. You tried it once. It fought back. And beneath all of this, literally underfoot, is the fermentation pit. Dug into the cold earth, it's lined with stones and filled with sealed jars of various experiments. No one opens those unless they have to. The last time your cousin did, the smell took up residence in his eyebrows for 3 days. But here's the truth. This chaos is sacred. Every shelf, every jar, every leathery pouch represents survival, planning, and creativity. This isn't just food storage. It's the family's hope, buried in ash and wool and sour mill. You sweep out some dust, check for mold, and restack the puffin jerky. Then you sit back, the smell of smoked lamb and sour whey curling in the air. It's not glamorous. It's not fresh. But it's honest. And in a few minutes, when your mother calls you for supper, a simple stew of dried seaweed, moss, and a few hard-earned slices of that hanjik, you'll eat it gratefully. Because in this pantry of strange textures and layered smells, lies the beating heart of the Icelandic home. The fire crackles low. The longhouse is unusually full tonight. Your cousins have come in from the next valley, and there's been a buzz in the air since morning, not because of good news exactly, but because today it is feast day. Which, in medieval Iceland, doesn't necessarily mean excess. It just means not soup again. Feasts happen for many reasons: settings, births, religious holidays, the annual sheep roundup, or simply because someone found a particularly enthusiastic onion. Today's occasion. Your cousin Perrin is getting betrothed to a girl from the fjord-side farm with the notorious goose. You've never met her. But the goose once bit your uncle and became a saga in its own right. The table, which is actually just a plank laid across barrels, has been cleared of tools and parchment. Torches flicker against the turf walls. People have brought out their nicest wool, clean, patched, and mostly free of barn smells. There's a quiet excitement in the air, as if everyone is pretending they didn't just eat bark broth 3 days ago. On the menu tonight, barley porridge with seal oil, dried cud, slivers of pickled lamb tongue, a small wheel of sour cheese that may or may not still be sentient, and miraculously a boiled egg. A chicken egg. You didn't even know anyone still had chickens. It's not abundance. But it's a spread. Historians still argue whether medieval Icelandic feasts were elaborate or simply well-organized reshufflings of everyday ingredients. Some sources mention grand meals with multiple courses. Others suggest the average feast just meant slightly more of the same, served with extra ceremony. What's agreed upon is that hospitality mattered. Generosity was currency. Sharing food was a sign of power, of connection, of survival. You sit cross-legged beside your cousin, spoon in hand. The porridge is thick, heavy with barley, and slick with a sheen of seal fat. It's oddly comforting. Each bite warms your belly like a wool cloak from the inside out. You can almost pretend it tastes good. Next comes the dried cod. It's been pounded thin with a stone and soaked in sour whey for hours. You tear off a strip and chew. It's like eating fish-flavored parchment. Which, in a way, you are. There's a moment of silence as someone brings out the goose. Yes, that goose. Cooked in its entirety, stuffed with herbs and dried berries, and perched in the center of the table like a defeated warrior. The girl from the fjord watches closely as Björn cuts into it. It squeaks. A few feathers remain. Someone claps politely. Then, the cheese. It's hard, crumbly, and aggressively sour. Aged for at least a year in a sealed sheep's stomach. It's opened with great fanfare and a knife that probably used to be a plow blade. A slice is passed to each person on a flat rock. It tastes like victory and mold. You love it. Even the drink tonight is special fermented scar mixed with birch sap. It's bubbly, a little sweet, and just alcoholic enough to make your aunt sing louder than usual. The tune is about a legendary cow that gave milk that never soured, lived in the mountains, and possibly turned into a rock. No one's sure. The beat is catchy. As the night wears on, more food appears. A smoked seal fin. A flatbread made with precious rye. A honey puffin egg that someone must have bartered with a wizard to obtain. People laugh, tell stories, recite verses from sagas. The children chase each other between beds. The fire blazes. And despite the cold outside, the longhouse glows warm and gold. You glance at the wall. There's still moss in the pantry. Still dried seaweed and barley scraps. But tonight, those stay untouched. Tonight is about plenty, not in quantity, but in spirit. You finish your meal with a sliver of cold lamb tongue dipped in sour cream and smoked salt. It's tender. Salty. Almost. Refined. You could get used to this. The groom gives a small toast. He raises a wooden cup, wobbles slightly, and says, to love, to warmth, and to meals with more than one ingredient. Everyone cheers. And in that moment, surrounded by ladder, flickering firelight, and the lingering smell of boiled goose, you feel the truth settle deep in your chest. It's not what's on the table, it's who's around it. The sun is up well, slightly more present than usual, and that means it's foraging day again. But today, you're not looking for moss or edible lichen. Today is for treats. Specifically, seaweed, birch sap, and anything remotely sweet that isn't just someone's imagination. Your younger brother is already halfway down the cliffside path, a pouch slung over his shoulder, and his eyes fixed on the horizon like an explorer of old. You follow more carefully, the rocks slippery with frost and sea mist. At the bottom, the tide has retreated just enough to expose tangled beds of seaweed, some black and flat, others long and green, curling like slow-motion snakes. This is your target, Sul. A red alga dried by the sun and chewed like candy. It's salty. A little fishy. A lot chewy. But when your teeth have only known barley and bark for a week, Sul is basically dessert. You pull clumps from the rocks, shake off the sand, and stuff them in a pouch lined with linen. The trick is to get them before the gulls do. Or your cousin. Or the tide. In that order. Seaweed, in many forms, played a surprisingly rich role in medieval Icelandic diets. Not just as filler in soups or animal feed, but as something genuinely enjoyed. Historians still debate whether it was used more for nutrition or flavor, but surviving texts do mention Sul by name, sometimes even in poems. Which suggests, at least somebody was a fan. After the harvest, you stop by the birch grove. The trees are short and twisted, like dancers frozen mid-curtsy. You've brought a small clay jar and a carved reed. You score a thin notch in the bark and insert the reed, tilting the jar just so. Birch sap drips slowly. Thin, clear, almost tasteless but subtly sweet, like morning frost kissed with sugar. Your family mixes it with sour whey to make drinks, or boils it down into a thick glaze used for special occasions. Like when your uncle stops talking about his foot fungus for more than 10 minutes. That kind of rare. You gather a few handfuls of early crowberries, tootmy, dark, tart enough to pucker your entire soul. Most are shriveled, survivors of winter, but still edible. Your brother eats 5 in a row and immediately regrets it. You hand him a strip of seaweed to chase the flavor. He regrets that too. Back at the longhouse, the treats are laid out on a slate, seaweed strips, dried angelica root, a dollop of birch sap glaze from last summer miraculously preserved in beeswax, and even a single piece of boiled sheep poo. Don't ask. Your mother is feeling generous. She's taken bits of dried moss, boiled them with whey and birch sap, then set the mixture in a hollowed horn to cool. The result is a kind of wobbly jelly-sweet adjacent, soft, and gray. You all cheer. Your aunt cries. This is Icelandic candy. This is what joy tastes like. You pass around tiny wooden spoons and dip them into the moss jelly. It jiggles. It doesn't resist. And for a fleeting moment, it reminds you of warm summer days and actual fruit. Later, someone brings out a pouch of smoked milk curds. They're hard as pebbles and meant to be sucked slowly like lozenges. Your grandfather insists they're an acquired taste. You suspect no one has ever acquired it. Still, you try one. The smokiness curls around your tongue like an old story. The salt makes your eyes water, just a little. But it is something different, something special. And that's enough. That night, as the sun barely dips beneath the horizon, and the shadows grow long and soft, your family sits together, chewing seaweed and humming old lullabies. There's laughter. A game involving throwing moss balls at your cousin's head. Someone sneaks another birch sap jelly. And for all its rough edges, for all the scarcity, and sourness, tonight tastes like delight. Because even in a land of moss and salt, people find sweetness. They make it. They share it. One bite at a time. The bells ring softly from the chapel hill, a hollow clang that floats through the morning mist like a reminder. Today is a fast day. Again. You sigh and pull your cloak tighter. Breakfast is already less of a meal and more of a ritual, but on religious fast days, it transforms into an exercise in imagination. You sit at the table with a half cup of sour whey, 3 barley crumbs, and a pine needle your brother insists is edible. You're not convinced. Medieval Iceland, for all its ruggedness, took Christian rituals seriously. After official conversion in the year 1000, the island adopted a yearly calendar full of feast days, fast days, saints' observances, and Lenten stretches that lasted weeks. Which sounds poetic until you realize how many of those involved eating almost nothing. Today's fast is in honor of Saint someone you forget exactly who, But you remember the rules: no meat, no dairy, no showing off, and definitely no sneaking puffin legs from the smokehouse. Not again. So the family gathers in quiet, devout half-hunger. Your father leads a short prayer. Your mother ladles out a thin soup made from boiled angelica root, seawater, and an apologetic-looking strip of moss. You eat it with reverence. Mostly. Historians still debate how strictly fasting rules were followed in Iceland. Some sagas imply people bent the rules declaring puffins as fish to get around meat bans, or pretending that sour milk didn't really count as dairy. Others show deep devotion, with communities sharing limited vegetables, herbs, and the occasional egg during the longest religious fasts. You've seen both. Your great-aunt, for example, once skipped a feast entirely because someone accidentally added sheep fat to the stew. But your uncle, he once declared seal blubber a form of spiritual anointing and ate 3 bowls before being gently escorted outside. Today, your cousin tries something similar, claiming the moss porridge accidentally had bone broth in it, and he must now, regrettably, consume a strip of lamb to purify his palate. No one believes him, but he gets away with it. It is his name day. Still, the mood is softer. Slower. There's less chewing. More reflecting. Your aunt sings an old hymn while she stirs a pot of boiled barley and crowberry leaves. The children play quietly. The fire is gentler, like it knows not to crack too loud. You spend the afternoon helping the priest's apprentice sort herbs in the chapel's small garden. Most are dry, clinging to life, but a few wild thyme, nettle, a stubborn patch of creeping they may still grow. He teaches you how to dry them in bundles above the smoke. Not for flavor, he says with a smile, but to remember what flavor feels like. Dinner is more of the same. A shared bowl of soup. A few nibbles of flatbread made from last month's barley. And for dessert, if you can call it that, a thin slice of dried birch bark soaked in whey and scraped with honey. It's like chewing a poem about sweetness someone forgot to finish. And yet, there's something oddly soothing about it all. The restraint. The silence. The way your stomach growls and no one seems embarrassed. The way you all look at the last bit of moss jelly and agree, without speaking, to save it for tomorrow. As the sun dips low and the chapel bell rings again, your family gathers around the hearth, singing psalms in soft, steady voices. You join in, not for piety, maybe, but for peace. Because fasting isn't just about absence. It's about togetherness. About noticing the hunger and then realizing you're not facing it alone. And in that quiet, sacred space between bites, you feel full in a different way. Snow is falling sideways again, in that passive-aggressive Icelandic way that says, "Oh, you thought we were done." You pull your hood low and clutch the small leather pouch tighter. Inside are the last scraps of dried barley flatbread, 2 pieces of cod skin, and a brittle hunk of musk cracker that might technically qualify as a rock. It's midwinter now, the heart of the lean season. And everyone around you is hungry. Not starving, not yet, but riding that uneasy edge where every bite is counted, and every rumor of an extra seal fin is worth walking a mile through ice. Your mother's face has grown tighter. Your father's stories, once long and meandering, have shortened to mumbles over broth. Even your little brother has stopped complaining and started chewing on his sleeves. This is normal. This is winter in medieval Iceland. And it's why the root cellar is visited with something close to reverence now. You go down together, torch in hand, eyes scanning for anything you forgot was there. A slice of smoked lamb behind the barrel. A jar of old whey with mysterious floaters. A turnip that isn't entirely hollow. Treasures. Historians still argue how frequent famine was in medieval Iceland. Some sources suggest near-yearly winter scarcity. Others point to smarter preservation, community sharing, and just enough trade to limp through. But all agree, the winter months were a game of endurance. Tonight, dinner is water-thinned barley porridge with a dash of seaweed ash and one precious slice of dried puffin meat shared among 5 bowls. Your cousin swears it tastes better if you imagine it's lamb. You try. Your brain refuses. There's no pretending the hunger isn't real. You feel it deep in your limbs, in the hollowness between words. Everyone moves slower. Laughter fades into murmurs. Even the fire seems to burn with less confidence. But you keep going. Because that's what people do. You help your aunt ration what's left. She counts things in half-thoughts. Enough for 5 days if we skip lunch. Enough way for 3 more porridges if we boil it thin. Enough salt to pretend something tastes better than it does. The math is survival. To store what little remains, she buries jars of skyr in a snowbank outside. It's cold enough that nothing spoils, but not so cold that she can't retrieve them quickly if someone gets sick. Snow is insulation, freezer, and hiding place, all in one. Meanwhile, your grandfather is telling another story, this one about a winter even worse, where they ate boiled leather and chewed pine needles to trick the stomach. You're not sure if it's true. You're not sure it matters. Outside, the snow thickens. The wind howls like a bored god looking for someone to pester. You bundle moss into the cracks of the wall to keep the heat in and your hopes from leaking out. Later, as night settles, your mother hands out sleep rock smooth stones heated by the fire, wrapped in wool, and tucked into your blankets to trick the body into feeling full. It helps. A little. Your brother whispers that he dreamed of cheese. A wheel of it, the size of the moon. You both laugh, but softly, so your stomach doesn't think you've gone mad. And then you hear it. A knock at the door. Everyone freezes. It's your neighbor, red-faced, arms full of dried fish. He traded an old axe head and a goat pelt for a sack of cod in the next village. He offers to share. No one cries. But your father grips his hand for just a second too long. Your aunt quietly clears space on the plank table. A fire is stoked higher. Tonight's meal is still small, still humble, but it's more than you expected. And as you chew slowly, savoring every salted bite, you realize, hunger teaches you more than hardship. It teaches you to cherish what is there warm. Generosity, a story shared in the glow of the heart. Even when the stomach is hollow, the heart can feel full. You're helping sweep out the longhouse when your cousin blurts, "That cheese is only for chieftains." Everyone pauses. The cheese in question is a gray, hard wedge that's been aging in a sheep's stomach for at least a year. Possibly two. It smells like a foot that learned to ferment. And yet people are staring at it like it's gold. Food in medieval Iceland wasn't just about eating. It was about status. And not in the modern Instagrammable brunch sense. Here, food meant social rank, alliances, and identity. What you ate, how much, and with whom said more about your place in the world than any fancy cloak or carved brooch ever could. So yes, that horrid old cheese does mean something. It means your family has enough resources to keep milk long enough to age. That you have the storage, the patience, the experience. It means power. Historians still argue how deep these food status dynamics ran in medieval Iceland. Sagas often describe grand feasts and symbolic offerings like giving a visiting chieftain the best cut of lamb, or seating them closest to the hearth. But even outside those stories, small markers of hierarchy showed up on every plate or slab of driftwood. Take scar, for instance. Everyone eats it, but how you eat it varies. A thrall might gulp it straight from a bowl, plain and sour. A wealthy farmer could serve it with crushed berries and a drizzle of whey glaze, both rarities. And a chieftain, he might pair it with cold lamb, sea salt, and a horn of fermented whey. Same base food, different experience entirely. Today, your family is preparing a meal for the local Goya law speaker and religious leader. He's visiting to settle a land dispute and, more importantly, expects lunch. That means pulling out the good stuff. The cheese is first, cut with a sharpened bone knife, presented on a square of cured seal skin. Then comes dried lamb, sliced so thin it's nearly translucent, layered atop rye bread imported, obviously. There's even a few withered apple sepals. A rare gift from a merchant ship last autumn. You each get a sliver. He gets the core. You help arrange the food on carved wooden trays. No pottery. Too breakable. Wood holds heat better, and besides, it smells like real Iceland. When the goy arrives, you stand quietly by the fire, pretending to stir something while sneakily observing the rituals unfold. He sits near the head of the table, of course, and nods graciously as his sir. Your uncle speaks in a lower, more careful voice. Your mother uses her clean apron. Even the dog has been told to behave. It doesn't. The goy eats slowly, with purpose. He makes a small noise of approval at the lamb. He raises an eyebrow at the aged cheese. He finishes his bowl of skyr, which is the medieval Icelandic equivalent of a standing ovation. After he leaves, everyone exhales. And then, the leftovers become fair game. Your cousin lunges for a scrap of lamb. You go for the apple sliver. The dog wins a chunk of bread. It's a celebratory chaos, everyone tasting a little of what status feels like. Just enough to remember. Because here's the quiet truth, in Iceland, everyone struggled. But some struggled slightly more deliciously than others. And food, especially rare or preserved delicacies, was the language of importance. To serve well was to show worth. To eat well was to be seen. Later, your grandmother hands you a tiny cheese scrap wrapped in cloth. For helping, she says. You chew it slowly. It's strong, salty, smells faintly like achievement. And as the sun dips low and the fire crackles back to life, you realize that food isn't just survival. It's social currency. It's ceremony. It's cheese that makes people listen to you more closely. Steam rises gently from the pot in the center of the hearth, thick, sour, and fragrant with familiarity. Tonight's dinner isn't fancy. It isn't a feast. It's home. A bubbling stew of barley, dried lamb, and dollops of skyr folded in at the end, turning the broth creamy and tangy all at once. It's community pot night. In medieval Iceland, not every family had enough food or even enough fire to cook on their own every night. So communities adapted. They shared. They pooled ingredients, labor, and space to make something that everyone could eat, together. The result was a patchwork of neighborhood pots, cauldrons, and kettles that simmered with collaboration. You're ladling out bowls now, scooping from a cast iron pot that's older than your father's father. It lies in the center of the longhouse, blackened with soot and blessed by 100 winters' worth of prayers and farts. No one knows who originally owned it. It's the pot. It just is. Tonight, 5 families have contributed. One brought barley. Another dried seaweed. Your family added 2 fist-sized chunks of blood sausage from last autumn. Someone even brought pickled crowberry star. Little explosions that cut through the stew's richness with surprising joy. Everyone gathers around with wooden bowls and spoons. Children sit cross-legged on the floor. The elderly perch on carved stumps, their cloaks drawn close. The mood is soft. Firelight dances on tired faces. You sit beside your cousin, trading stories and whispers. He claims he once saw an elf steal a loaf of barley bread from a sleeping man's satchel. You roll your eyes, then quietly pass him your second spoonful of sausage. It's worth it. The stew is hearty, thick with shared effort. Each bite tastes like 6 different kitchens, all trying their best. It's not elegant, but it's honest and strangely delicious. Skyr, the ever-present fermented milk product, appears next. One neighbor brings out a clay jug packed with it, cold and stiff, topped with a drizzle of seal oil and a pinch of smoked salt. You all share from the jug, passing it around in careful turns. Someone adds wild thing leaves to their scoop. Someone else dips their bread crust in. It's the flavor of Iceland in one bite, sour, salty, smoky, stubborn. Historians still discuss whether communal cooking was a daily necessity or more of a seasonal habit. Archaeological evidence suggests longhouses had centralized hearths and shared tools. Oral histories mention neighbors trading meat for cheese, or gathering for stew when one family lost their only goat. Either way, the idea is clear. Food wasn't just consumed. It was circulated. After dinner, your aunt pulls out a string of dried kelp candy and slices off thin strips for the children. It's chewy, slightly sweet, and makes your teeth stick together. You pretend to hate it. You definitely ask for more. You stay by the fire long after the bowls are empty. Your grandfather tells an old tale about a farmer who made a pot of soup so good it healed a broken leg. Probably exaggerated. But you still glance at your ankle. Just in case. As people drift off into their own corners of the longhouse, someone tosses a few more sticks on the fire. The light flares, then settles. Bellies are full. Hearts are warm. And you're left with this thought. Even when food is simple, even when it's moss, barley, blood, and hope it becomes something extraordinary when it's shared. So you wrap yourself in wool, stretch out on the floor, and fall asleep to the soft sound of spoons being licked clean. The wind has quieted. The hearth glows low, reduced now to a basin of orange coals and sighing ash. You stir quietly in your blanket, ears attuned to the gentle night noise snoring from the far cot, the scratch of straw shifting under someone's weight, and the soft drip of melting ice from the roof beams above. Everything is slower now. Calmer. You rise and tiptoe to the side room, the one with the sloped stone wall and the little shelf where your mother keeps the memory things. A small carved spoon. A puffin feather. An ancient shard of sea-polished glass, green as an inland spring. And beside them, a cloth pouch with a single, perfect piece of dried skyr tucked inside. Not to eat. Just to remember. This is what food becomes, when the hardship lessens ritual. Story. Heritage. Not just what you had, but what it meant. You recall how your grandmother always folded her bread 3 times before eating it, murmuring a blessing to the cows. Or how your cousin never drank whey unless it was warmed and mixed with birch sap. He claimed it helped him dream of fish. You suspect he just didn't like cold drinks. But still, it became part of the lore. In medieval Iceland, meals weren't just about calories. They were containers of memory. Eating was a way to survive. Yes, but also a way to remember, to pass down, to quietly insist, we were here. And we made it through. Tonight, after so many days of salt and moss and bone and broth, your family has managed something unexpected. A stew that's almost rich. It had barley, dried lamb, wild thyme, even a shaving of butter scraped from a forgotten jar. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew it was a good pot. One worth remembering. You helped stir it, of course. You always do. You know exactly how long it takes for the barley to thicken. When to add the sour skyr for tang. When to lower the flame so it doesn't stick. These things are never written down. They are taught by hand, passed down by wooden spoon and patient repetition. Historians still argue whether this kind of cooking, communal, oral, deeply instinctual, should be called cuisine at all. It has no recipes, no spices, no garnish. But you know better. You know this is the kind of cooking that made survival beautiful, that made hardship bearable. As you sit by the fire, someone begins humming an old lullaby. You recognize it. It's the one your grandfather sang when you were little, something about a cow flying over a fjord, probably nonsense. But the tune fits the flicker of the fire. You hum along. Your mother joins you. She hands you a small scrap of cheese, aged hard, sour, cracked from dryness. For your pocket, she whispers. In case you get hungry during dreams. You smile and tuck it away. And you think how strange and lovely that even in a world so full of wind and ice and scraping by, people still manage to make room for tenderness. To gather. To ferment. To feast. To laugh. To flavor the day, even if that flavor came from seaweed and barley boiled in sheet mill. This is the quiet genius of Icelandic food culture. It didn't try to conquer nature. It listened. It adapted. It became part of the land it fed. And you, wrapped in moss-scented wool and the weight of a full belly, carry that legacy with every step. Because long after the taste fades, what remains is the meaning of it all. And the fire burns on. The hearth grows cooler now. The flames shrink into a soft, pulsing glow just enough to light the curves of the old pot. The folds of wool draped across a sleeping shoulder. Someone sighs in there. Sleep. The longhouse settles like a breath released. Outside, snow taps against the turf roof in the gentlest rhythm. Inside, the night wraps itself around you like another blanket, soft, slow, and deeply still. You shift under your covers. The air carries faint traces of smoked lamb and ash. You are warm. Your stomach is quiet. Your mind drifts not to tomorrow, but to the memory of today's barley stew, the way the broth clung to the spoon, the way everyone leaned just a little closer to the fire. Let your breathing match the rhythm of the quiet. Let your thoughts stretch like moss across stone, patient, slow, and green beneath the snow. You are safe here. There are no demands in this moment. Only rest. Only the peace of a full pot, and a roof that holds strong against the wind. The stories of those who came before, their meals, their laughter, their quiet triumphs, they hum gently in your chest. You are part of that rhythm now. One more ember in the hearth. One more voice in the soft, shared silence of night. So close your eyes. Let the warmth stay with you. And drift, slowly, home.